Welcome to week three's lecture. As you've probably learned by now, doing business globally or internationally, whatever you want to call it, is very beneficial for an organization. Um, the main advantage being that it really helps to expand the market share of the company, which contributes directly to increased revenues and hopefully increased profitability. There are some things that can reduce profitability, but the goal is usually to reach more customers, to sell more products or more services, and thereby increasing revenues and increasing profitability. This week, what I want to focus on, though, is the fact that as you look to expand internationally, and we would have looked at some of the ways to expand internationally in prior weeks. There are some drawbacks that governments, or some, we can call them interventions that governments put in place to potentially limit international business and uh, you know, doing business in the global marketplace. A couple of those ways we talked about before would be exporting or importing. So one country exports goods and services, and another country imports those goods or services. That's one way to do business globally. Another could be, direct investment, where you actually set up shop in the foreign country. Okay, so those are a couple ways that we can do business. But the government, as I mentioned, of that country can intervene to limit the amount of global business that's being done in the particular country or territory. In prior weeks, some of the ways we talked about, in prior weeks, we talked about tariffs, and that's very relevant now because, as I mentioned previously, and as if you're watching the news, you will know that there's a tariff war going on. And again, a tariff is essentially a tax. So it's a tax that's imposed on imports. Okay. So a country sends its goods or its services to another country, and because the country that's receiving those goods or services wants to limit the amount of goods or services that potentially come in, they may impose a tax. And the reason they would want to limit it is because they want to promote more local um, production of goods or services, right? So if a country keeps importing and imported from another country and it's at a low cost, it stifles domestic production. So tariffs is one of those ways that if a country is importing goods or services and the government puts a hefty tariff on it, right? So that's in additional to the cost of the good or service, then it becomes more expensive for people in that country to afford those goods or services. And so it kind of stifles uh, wanting those goods or services. So an example would be a vehicle. Let's say you want a German-made vehicle, so Mercedes-Benz. Um, Mercedes is typically not manufactured in the US. I mean, there's some plants around the US that will do some, but Mercedes is a German car. So let's say German cars are being imported into America and they cost $40,000, let's say. If the government wants to really hammer down on a Mercedes-Benz to promote buying more Ford vehicles, because Ford is a US made vehicle, it can impose heavy tariffs on the Mercedes-Benz, which makes it more expensive. So let's say it can, if it wanted to, it can put 100% tariff on a Mercedes-Benz. So then instead of $40,000, in order to import it into America, it would now be $80,000. And so it becomes a lot more cost prohibitive and more expensive to afford. So that's an example of how a tariff works. And that obviously stifles imports or stifles international business. A way to promote international business is a subsidy. So, a subsidy is really a form of government payment to a producer. And it can come in the form of a tax break, it can come in the form of a low interest loan. Um, and really, what the government is doing is facilitating more business. Okay, so that actually promotes global and international business. Another way that stifles international business would be an import quota, or a voluntary export restraint. An import quota is where, let's say, in the example of the Mercedes-Benz, the government, it costs 40,000, the government's putting a 100% tariff on it. It now costs $80,000, but we're finding that people don't care. People want these Mercedes-Benz, so they're paying for the vehicle. They're buying it at the cost, the $80,000. What the government can do is, okay, the tariffs are not really dissuading buyers. We can put import quotas in place, which means that only a certain number of Mercedes-Benz vehicles can be imported into the US. So that's another way of stifling global and international business. And a voluntary export restraint um, is where the exporting country may actually um, limit how much it exports, right? And you may ask yourself, why would a country want to limit how much it exports? And I'll give you a second to think about it. Just think about, why would a country potentially want to limit its exports? And I'll give you an example of why shortly. But take a second and think about it. So I'll give you an example of the country from where I was born, Barbados. Barbados is a producer of sugar. And one of the things that we found was that there was a huge, huge, huge demand internationally for sugar. And sugar can get a higher price in the international market than it can get in Barbados. And so the producers of sugar locally in Barbados preferred to export the sugar and get that higher price for it than to sell it locally, which means that then Barbados had to import sugar for locals to use, believe it or not. It sounds crazy, but it happens. But the thing is that the sugar that was being imported was a lot lower quality than the sugar that was being exported, right? And so what the government did was put a voluntary export restraint on that sugar, which says that local producers had to keep a certain amount of that sugar in the country for locals to use. So that would be a voluntary export subsidy, or a voluntary export restraint, or a VER. Some other ways, currency controls. So a government may limit the convertibility of one currency, which means its own, into others. And I'll use Barbados again. Barbados is a very small country and it doesn't make a lot of goods locally. And so folks prefer to import goods. But the problem is that other countries don't accept the Barbados currency. So Barbados uses the Barbados dollar, and other countries don't accept the Barbados dollar. Only Barbados does. And so folks need to convert their Barbados dollars into international dollars, such as the euro or the US dollar, in order to do imports. And that actually depletes the foreign currency reserves that the country has. And so governments can implement a currency control which says that um, people in a country can only get a certain amount of foreign dollars within a given period. And that also helps stifle international business, because if you only have a certain amount of foreign currency, you can only import a certain amount of goods with that money. Again, because they don't take the Barbados dollar. So that's another way to control international business. And the last thing I'll talk about is just anti-dumping rules. So dumping is usually when a company sells its product at a very low price in order to infiltrate a market and try to push a competitor out of that market. Um, and so countries can prevent companies from dumping, so that they can then control the product that's available in their market. And as you will read about in your in the article for this week, there's also local content requirements. That's where companies require a certain percentage of a product be manufactured or assembled locally. And you'll see the current government administration is trying to do that, especially with vehicles. They're trying to have certain number of vehicles manufactured locally in the US. You'll also read about export financing, free trade zones, and administrative policies, all of which have an impact and an effect on foreign and international business. So those were the key points that I really wanted to talk to you about for this week. Good luck.